I killed Santa, Christmas will finally be peaceful around here. I mean, I can't imagine anything possibly going wrong now. Toaster? Well, guess it was about time for a change anyway. What's up, Kanoka Club? Well, it's that time of year again. The weather is getting colder, the stores are selling eggnog, and Last Christmas by Wham isn't leaving my brain no matter what I do. But that's enough about September. That's right. It's Christmas, or whatever you celebrate time, and it's highly likely that you'll be watching some sort of adaptation of The Nutcracker. The Nutcracker, or The Nutcracker and the Mouse King as the original book was titled, is a story written by E.T.A. Hoffmann in 1816. After some revisions, it was adapted into a ballet in 1892, often called Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker, after the guy who created the score for it. The ballet is what many people use as the basis for their adaptations, and one of those adaptations was made for a little-known doll line called Barbie. If you don't know who Barbie is, welcome to the real world, but in short, she was first introduced in 1959 by Mattel as a fashion doll, and her impact on culture is fairly obvious. I won't get too deep into her history, however, since I feel that the toys that made us did a good enough job there. Unlike, their jobs on Power Rangers and Bionicle, but let's keep our focus here. I will note, though, that she was adapted from a German doll called Build Lily. So, a doll adapted from a German product adapts a ballet that itself was adapted from a German story. Isn't that neat? Though we should probably get on topic for why I'm making this video. You see, Barbie had a direct-to-video film series that lasted for 35 movies. Essentially, Barbie's popularity was beginning to decline in the late 90s, and competition from stuff like Bratz wasn't helping any. Marketing research showed that girls were spending more time online than playing with physical dolls, so they decided to create more media for Barbie, which ultimately resulted in the Barbie film series. This would then lead to basically free marketing for dolls meant to tie into the film, and boom, profit. And let's get something established right from the get-go. I am not, by any margin, the target audience for these films. But I am willing to give them a fair shot. There are 35 of these things, so surely at least some of them have to be good. I gave Bionicle Mask of Light a lot of love last year, and while I obviously can't extend the same amount of love here, I'll try to at least be a fair representation of the film's quality. And so, with all that out of the way, let's start our Barbie film review series off with 2001's Barbie and the Nutcracker. To start with, you'll have to excuse the video quality a bit. I don't have any intentions of buying 35 Barbie movies on DVD, so I got this footage through less than desirable methods. I'll try to alleviate the issue with a border, but hopefully the next review can use a better rip. Anyway, after the opening credits with two child fairy things that show up later, we open on a scene of Barbie, voiced by Kelly Sheridan for all these movies, teaching this girl named Kelly to dance up the Sugar Plum Fairy. And that's probably the most accurate guess I'll make in this review, as I'm not 100% familiar with the original ballet. I might name a few where it's convenient to summarize with, they do this dance, but I'm afraid this review is a bit lower on the research side. Look, from my perspective, I just got done with a Bionicle Mask of Light review that involved a lot of lore checking. So I could use an easy one before I get back into the more heavy videos. Though I will note that they actually did use motion capture for these dances, and it actually kinda holds up for the most part. Anyway, Kelly can't get this dance down and wants to give up since she doesn't want to freeze on stage or anything, but Barbie says she needs to not give up. Like Clara.
Clara? From the ballet?
Uh-huh. You see, Clara lost her parents when she was very young.
Barbie, I'm in the freaking ballet! You don't need to explain the plot to me! But no, this is how we transition into the story proper, where we see Barbie take the role of Clara and interact with her family on Christmas Eve. Like her grandfather, Drosselmeyer, with a perpetual stick up his butt, and her brother Tommy, whose model just graduated from the PS1, and who possesses the ability to make cookies sound like apples.
Hey!
And finally, her Aunt Elizabeth, who has apparently traveled all over the world. Clara wants to hear all about her aunt's travels, but her grandfather thinks that her aunt is a weirdo for not staying at home, like a sensible person. While her aunt thinks that Clara should be allowed to see the world. Yeah, I think we know that setup. Time for some presents! Tommy gets some soldier toys, and Clara gets a titular nutbuster, who is oddly articulated for the 1800s. Tommy tries to take the Nutcracker from Clara, but just ends up breaking his arm. Which sounds pretty painful, but I remember the Mickey Mouse version having his head ripped off, so I think he got out kinda easy in this adaptation. Nevertheless, Clara just gives him a little sling for his broken arm, and as the night passes, she falls asleep with the Nutcracker in her arms, and her aunt and grandfather have another small kerfuffle about Clara wanting to travel. Gramps thinking it's impractical, while Auntie thinks she's mature enough to do it. However, it's not too heated an issue, as they still do talk respectfully with each other about it, even if they disagree. Well, I can give the film one thing already. Most of the characters aren't too unreasonable about anything, to the point where even a stuffy dude like Drosselmeyer can still agree to disagree about an issue. Good stuff. But anyway, Nutcracker's there, Clara's asleep, and it's midnight, baby! Time for cheese! As the forces of the Mouse King come through the mouse hole, after some magic stuff. I'll try to break this down later. Just go with it for now. By the way, this all kicks off by a grandfather clock sounding off, which definitely would have woken up Clara immediately. I've been in the presence of one of those things before. They're loud as all heck. Anyway, as the mice enter and start wrecking stuff, we see that the Nutcracker fell off the couch, but landed on his feet. He ain't even alive yet. Is he weighted like a water bottle? Naturally, he comes to life, and begins fighting the mice off with his sword. And naturally, having slept through the midnight chime of a grandfather clock, the Nutcracker's voice is what finally wakes Clara up. And she takes this bizarre scenario fairly well.
I must be dreaming.
And believe it or not, Clara, it gets stranger, as the Mouse King, voiced by Tim Curry, who is apparently very happy to be in Barbie's first film, if interviews are to be believed, enters the scene and thusly enters a scuffle with the Nutcracker. And well, let's just say this fight isn't as well choreographed as the dance sequences. Anyway, the Mouse King gains the upper hand, so Clara steps in for the Nutcracker's defense, leading to the Mouse King giving her a good shrinkage for her troubles. This does give the Nutcracker enough time to catch a second win though, and after some more fighting, which leads to Clara climbing up the garland on the fireplace, while the Nutcracker fends off some goons at the bottom, the Mouse King manages to back the Nutcracker into a very vulnerable position. And if not for Clara yeeting a slipper at the King's head and knocking him out, this would be a much shorter film. By the way, she never retrieves that slipper. It just randomly materializes on her foot again in the next shots. Anyway, their king downed, the mice retreat, and after getting their bearings for a minute, the Nutcracker and Clara discuss her little size issue, to which the Nutcracker reveals that only someone called the Sugar Plum Princess can undo the king's spells. After that, this randomly alive clock owl reveals that, well, the Sugar Plum Princess is on an island across something called the Sea of Storms, and she gives Clara a necklace that'll transport her back to her house after they find the princess. Where this necklace comes from is actually a bit of foreshadowing for later on that I won't go into detail on. Remember kids, a review can only go into so much detail, so don't expect them to include everything good or bad about the movie. Though the good tends to get lost in the scuffle more than the bad, unfortunately. Is it weird to be a reviewer when you hate a lot of the stuff about reviewers? And thus, the details settled, our two protagonists set off for that one trippy sequence in Doctor Strange, and find themselves in an area where the way out is frozen over, and a bunch of snow fairies come along and do this. Don't you hate it when you can't skip the cutscenes? Anyway, after 2 minutes and 40 seconds of the same spinning move, the snow fairies, one of whom was one of the little girl fairies from the opening, open up a passageway for our two protagonists, who march on to a very obvious painting. Like, not even this poor quality is hiding how fake that looks. As they walk along and mention the Sugar Plum Princess again, they're overheard by this Beastars looking dude, who flies off to inform the Mouse King, who's kinda confused since, well, he's never heard of the Sugar Plum Princess apparently. Considering his backstory, you'd think he'd be informed, but whatever. He tells his guards to try and capture the Nutcracker while he cracks open the books, which is when we cut to Clara and the Nutcracker happening upon a wrecked candy village. There they find a doll and a horse, before being pelted by two small children armed with snowballs. They manage to quell these ferocious beasts with the doll, and find out that these kids were just screwing around in the forest while their village got slaughtered or something by the Mouse King. And we get a little bit of extra backstory on what's going on.
This is all Prince Eric's fault.
The son of the king who ruled before the mouse took over.
Yeah, but he wasn't much of a prince.
The king left his throne and the golden scepter to his royal advisor, until the prince could prove himself worthy.
Let me guess. The mouse decided he liked being king. But what happened to Prince Eric?
Yeah, you've probably guessed the next plot twist, but more on that later. They decide to ride the horse's carriage through the forest, and soon happen upon the Mouse King's army, just barely managing to escape via a very handy rope ladder. Guess it's a good thing that the Mouse King employs people with very poor eyesight. They're met by Major Mint and Captain Candy, the latter being the only non-white human character in this entire movie. He's also an old friend of Prince Eric, and verifies that yes, the Sugar Plum Princess is a thing. Thus, the two decide to accompany Clara and the Nutcracker as they find the princess. Also, Major Mint talks like this.
Oh, very well. We'll all go looking for the Sugar Plum Princess, but I'll be in charge of the expedition.
Wonderful. Anyway, we cut to the Mouse King about to punish some soldiers over losing the Nutcracker. However, he's a practical sort of evil despot. He's gonna turn you into something, sure, but he'll transform you into something useful, like a statue, a lawn ornament, or a paperweight. However, he has enough of those, so it's bookends for these two. And bookends he will need, as the first book he found with a mention of the Sugar Plum Princess doesn't yield much info. So he decides to send a rock monster after the Nutcracker in the meantime. If you ask Noah, this is a biblical reference. Cut back to the Nutcracker and Clara, which is where the film stops pretending that this isn't obvious. The Nutcracker is actually Prince Eric, transformed by the Mouse King. However, his character motivations are a bit less predictable than that. Take a listen.
I didn't want to be the prince when I had the chance. Now I don't deserve to be. But my subjects think less of me than they do the Mouse King. My only hope is to find the Sugar Plum Princess, so she can help me restore my people's happiness. I owe them that.
You see, Eric's motivation to find the princess is less about restoring his true form, and more just that he screwed up, and wants to make things right for his people. He doesn't care when people slam the prince in front of him, because he feels he deserves it for his part in all this. And when someone outright asks what happened to the prince, he says this.
Do you know what became of Prince Eric?
The Mouse King destroyed him.
He could have just said that he didn't know, but no. it's likely that Eric intends to give his life for the kingdom in order to set things right. So the prince may as well be dead. He's not here to reclaim his throne, he's here to rescue his people. And that's actually pretty compelling. Good job. Anyway, we fade to the next scene where Eric, as I'll call him from now on to save on typing, Clara, Mint, and Candy are on the way to the Sugar Plum Princess. After some drama over those floating platforms seen in most 3D video games, they come to the shore of the Sea of Storms. And our candied military dudes decide to get a boat ready, while Clara and Eric gather supplies. Opening up a well with his sword, Eric frees a bunch of spring fairies who dance around while restoring the area around them. This dance sequence isn't as bad as the snow fairy one, since, well, it's a lot more brief, but it still feels a bit forced. However, it ends pretty soon, as our rock monster arrives and gives chase to our two protagonists. It ends up crushing the boat they were going to use to cross the Sea of Storms, but don't worry, the snow fairies show up out of nowhere and freeze the entire sea solid! And then the horse and carriage is back. Yeesh, I wish the universe had this many conveniences lined up for me. The rock monster pursues them across the ice, until Eric uses his sword to open up a hole in the ice for the monster to fall through.
Rock sheet washed and chill.
Claire and Eric later have a quick conversation regarding the Sugar Plum Princess stuff. Trust me, the review is making this seem a lot more repetitive than it actually is. And Pim, the Beastars bat, overhears it and tells the Mouse King, who has gone through every book in the Royal Library and found no other mention of the Sugar Plum Princess, and has thus determined her to be a fantasy. But a useful fantasy. We cut back to our foursome, who have found the island where the princess supposedly is. And I'm sorry to make another video game reference, but this place really looks like an area in the Toy Story 3 video game. As they reach the castle, however, they find out that's fake. And to be honest, that twist does work due to how many flat backdrops they've been using in this film. But how did they walk right into a fake wall thinking it was an open room? So yeah, the three dudes get captured, but Clara, who had hung back for a moment, is left alone on the island with no way off now that the ice has melted. She does briefly consider just going home and battling cockroaches for a living, but decides against it as some spring fairies come along and volunteer to carry her to the Mouse King's castle. On a vine that I would totally trust to carry me across a long distance several feet in the air. She arrives and we cut to a meeting in the tree village Mint and Candy were guarding, to find some fairies arranging a revolt with the citizens. But Pim overhears us and tells the Mouse King about it, which leads to them just being captured in a later scene. That is literally the entire point of that brief subplot. Anyway, Clara finds the cell where the others are being kept and tricks her way past the guards, and frees the others from behind a magic wall because of romance I too easily get into, despite my rampant virginity. Also, note this bit of music. Normally, this type of musical swelling is reserved for, the moment before a big reveal, oh no, the villain was right there, waiting for them to come up the stairs, or whatever. But here, no, it's just the going up the stairs music. I do like a parody of it, but I don't have stairs in my house anymore. What the heck was that? Anyway, citizens, bonfire, Jizzmuncher to the rescue. After a fight, Eric is defeated, and Clara is set for another shrinking before Eric uses his shiny sword to reflect it back at the Mouse King, shrinking him but good. However, that little stunt set Eric on the dying path before he suddenly reverts back to his proper princely self. The reason? Well, as it's been admittedly subtly hinted at, Clara herself is the Sugar Plum Princess. I promise I didn't intentionally do 2 films in a row with the exact same twist. So yeah, kingdom restored, people accept Eric as king, let's get some mocap dancing in there. And look, neither of the first 2 feel entirely natural for the characters that do them, but the final dance between Clara and Eric feels pretty earned in my opinion, and is probably the best one in the entire movie. The music, the choreography, heck, Everything about the general presentation makes this scene really stand out, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who hold this moment as a high point in their childhood. Just a moment that sticks with you, no matter how old you get. Sure, you have to ignore Clara's clumpy rat hair, and Eric's sidestep that, I checked, are in the original dance choreography, just looks weird outside ballet tights. But it is a direct-to-video CGI movie made in 2001, take what you can get. Anyway, after the hoedown, Eric asks Clara to stay and be his queen, and she wants to, but the Mouse King comes swooping down on Pym, who is still loyal for some reason, and steals her locket, opening it so Clara has to be sent home. But he's hit by a snowball for his troubles. So yeah, that heartbreaking ending happens just before Clara wakes back up in her house, and starts talking about all this stuff to her grandfather and brother. She's a bit inconsistent between believing it was real, but still asking if Tommy took her Nutcracker. But soon her Aunt Elizabeth comes in with Eric? And he gives her a heart locket at full size and... Wait a minute.
I couldn't say no to the king.
Well, I thought this film was gonna be easy, but it just handed me a bunch of freaking lore to break down! First off, that line right there is meant to indicate that her and Eric are on the same page, since Aunt Elizabeth just said that Eric was a son of an old friend of hers. She said nothing about royalty. This means that yes, this isn't a fake out with a similar dude. This is the same freaking dude, who just crossed worlds and size to reunite with Clara. Which means that these worlds actually connect, as indicated by the place still having the damage from the earlier fight. This just brings up a lot of questions, like if Aunt Elizabeth knew the king with his magic and stuff, how Eric ended up being sold to Aunt Elizabeth, presumably a long way away from Clara's house, how Eric even got to the human world in the first place as a Nutcracker, and why there's a race of mouse-sized people who just live normal-sized lives in a kingdom that is apparently very real. And if the people are mouse-sized, how small does that make creatures like Pym and the fairies? Do we risk breaching the microverse here or what? Also, the film gives indications that Clara was always destined to be the Sugar Plum Princess, such as an ornament that her mom gave her when she saw her first ballet, said ornament looking a lot like her in the Sugar Plum Princess outfit. The owl on the clock knowing where the princess is, and the mouse hole in her house being the portal between worlds, also gives hints at that. Aunt Elizabeth mentions growing up in this house. So is that how she met the king? Did Eric's dad come through, shrink her, and show her around his kingdom? There was a giant portal that Eric and Clara missed the first time around, and he even mentions making a wrong turn. So maybe that was the portal to the castle, no longer in use after the king died? Did Aunt Elizabeth know that the Nutcracker was Prince Eric? She did mention him having the heart of a prince when she gave him to Clara, so it's possible. Did Eric know that portal was at Clara's house, and thus asked Elizabeth to do him a solid? Or did he lose his sentience when he was turned into a Nutcracker? I mean, he did need magic to revive him for the battle, and none of the other things that the Mouse King transformed had sentience, so maybe? But then, how did Aunt Elizabeth know that was Eric? Does all this lore not matter, and it was just a really big coincidence? I don't know! Look, it's not even that I mind the lore particularly, it's just... You could have warned me, you know? Let's just end the movie. Okay, romantic dance is down, and we go back to Barbie and Kelly and... Wait, it's night? It was the middle of the day before! How long was Barbie telling this story? Do they live in freaking Alaska? Anyway, Kelly uses this inspiration to get her dang steps down as our film ends. So overall, what did I think of this movie? Well, confusing and out of nowhere lore aside, I actually kind of liked it. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie is by no means perfect. Beyond future Barbie reference, I probably won't be popping it in every Christmas or anything. It isn't that good. But I can see this movie having a bit of a cult following of those who grew up with it, and want to introduce it to their children. It does bear the hallmarks of early direct-to-video CGI movies, like dated animation, a fairly well-used plot, and some characters that could be annoying to the parents of children watching it, But those also come with some surprisingly reasonable characters like Drosselmeyer, and characters with truly noble and well-thought-out intentions like Eric. In addition, while some of the music can feel out of place, like the stairs music, the London Orchestra performs it pretty well, and the mocap dancing came through pretty fluently to complement it. The voice cast is also pretty solid, which isn't surprising, as Andrea Romano of DCAU fame was the voice director. Overall, this movie is squarely in kids' territory, but for kids' territory it's not too bad, and can be recommended. And as this is the introductory Barbie movie, it's going to the top of the Barbie movie tier list. Let's just see how long it stays there. And so with that, I bid you adieu for now, Kanoka Club. Merry Christmas, or whatever you happen to celebrate, and I wish you all a Happy New Year. Let's hope 2022 is great. Though it's probably just gonna be another dumpster fire every year.